right, here we go now, baby. Welcome to another edition of Pound for Pound Picks, the UFC 295 edition of the show. We have two titles on the line this Saturday at Madison Square Garden. We have 7 total picks to break down. So let's stop wasting time. Very pleased to be joined by my partner, per usual, my guy, Ro, the pride of Halifax, Nova Scotia. Ro, how you making out?
Great. Pretty excited for this card.
Yeah, big one. Okay, so let's get right into it. Let's start like we always do at the top with the main event. The light heavyweight title is on the line. We have Yuri Prochazka, the former champ, coming in at plus 102. Alex Pereira comes in as a favorite, minus 122. My best bet for this fight, I'm going to take Pereira, minus 122. My number one reason for liking Pereira to win this fight is because of striking defense. Prochazka is a wild man. He lands quite a few strikes, but he also absorbs quite a few. He absorbs 5.4 significant strikes per minute in the UFC. He gets hit way too much. Pereira, in contrast, absorbs 3.7, which still isn't great, but I do think Pereira is the much more controlled striker, and he's got that touch of death in his fist. So I think he might be able to drop Pereira and maybe even finish him with one strike. I do expect this to be a striking battle, no serious threat of a takedown from either guy. So give me Pereira to win this fight and win a title at another weight class. Ro, what do you like for the main event here?
Look, I'm looking at the total rounds, and I actually sort of disagree there. I actually could see Prochazka use his grappling in this one. We obviously haven't seen much of it in the UFC. You have to go back a pretty long way into, KSW, some of his earlier fights to see him ever use that grappling. But he does have it in his back pocket. And he said something interesting, earlier, a couple months ago when he said that Pereira is not a good martial artist, like on the ground, on the wrestling. And so I think that is something he might, use in this one, might slow down the fight a little bit more. And I do think that even though everyone seems to think this fight's going to get over quickly, that often doesn't happen when you have two guys like this because they're so wary of each other's power. Like I said, almost all the odds suggest that this fight's going to be over in round 1 or 2. You look at kind of how Pereira fights, and he's a little bit more methodical than I think people realize. Yeah, he's got that dynamite in his hands, but he is a patient. He's a highly technical fighter. He uses those leg kicks a lot. We saw him go the distance against Pavlovich in his light heavyweight debut. And yeah, he was put to sleep by Adesanya earlier this year, but he should be more durable now that he's not cutting down to 185. But at the same time, his strength and power isn't going to be quite the game changer it was at the smaller weight class. So I could see this fight going a little bit longer than people think. I like this fight to start round 3. You can get that at DraftKings or FanDuel at close to even money.
Okay, let's drop down one fight to the co-main event. It is the interim heavyweight championship, but come on, this is the real heavyweight championship because we don't know what the hell is going on with John Jones and when he'll be able to defend that title. But this is one hell of a fight. Virtually a pick 'em, pretty close. Sergey Pavlovich coming in at minus 108. Tom Aspinall minus 112, depending on where you shop. Pavlovich might be the favorite over at some books. My best bet for this fight, I'm going to take this fight to start the second round, plus 110 over at DraftKings. I was going to take over 1.5 rounds, but I'm going to play it a little bit safer and just take this fight to enter the second round. So they need to complete the first round of the fight. So each man, obviously, look at their resumes, very efficient at taking out their opponent early, but neither man is efficient at being taken out themselves. So Pavlovich has only been finished once in his career. That was by Alistair Overeem 5 years ago. Tom Aspinall was only legitimately finished. He had that injury versus Curtis Blades. That doesn't really count as being finished by any means, but he was finished by a sub back in 2015. And this is the rare fight where this is the biggest fight of each fighter's career, the biggest challenge each of them will face. So maybe a little bit of a feeling out process. There's no need to be in a rush out there. This is a 5-round fight, and I wouldn't be surprised if Aspinall tries to take this fight to the mat early. What's that going to do? It's going to chew up some clock. Each guy, obviously, a high-volume striker, but Pavlovich does have that big reach advantage. So Aspinall maybe play it a little bit safer here early on. So I'll take this fight to finish the first round and enter the second, plus 110 odds on this. Bro, who you picking to win this thing?
So I got a side here. It's like we're kind of flip flopping on these two main event fights. You like the rounds here. I like the underdog here, the small underdog, Sergey Pavlovich. I like him to come through here. And I'm going to start off by saying that there's a couple of narratives that I'm hearing around this fight, which I'm not putting too much stock in. The first one is that Aspinall is going to be at a significant disadvantage because he took this fight on short notice, while Pavlovich was already preparing to be the backup fighter for Jones and Miocic. Although this isn't an ideal situation for Aspinall, it's not going to be as much of a detriment as it was for Volkanovski when he stepped into challenge for the lightweight title last month. Aspinall doesn't get a full camp, but he has 17 days to prepare, as opposed to 11 for Volk. And since Aspinall typically weighs well below the 265-pound weight limit, he's not going to be drained by a grueling cut, while Volk had to shed 26 pounds or something like that. But the second narrative I'm not buying is that Pavlovich is going to get destroyed on the mat. A lot of people are pointing out that loss to Overeem. He was taken down, finished with ground and pound in the first round. That fight happened 5 years ago, like you mentioned. Pavlovich
Yep.
was kind of taken down with this weird unorthodox trip position from a tie clinch as well. And it was a weird spot for him to be in. It was his UFC debut. He was flying halfway around the world and he was taking on a roided up Overeem there. So, I mean, let's be honest. You have to kind of look at his whole body of work. And the guy has a background in Greco-Roman wrestling. He's generally displayed good takedown defense in the past. And he'd also been training with Khabib and Daniel Cormier prior to his fight against the wrestling heavy Curtis Blades earlier this year. He was also likely continuing to work on that part of the game since he was probably going to replace Miocic to face Jones. And so, you kind of look at all that, and I think he's going to be a little bit better at keeping this fight standing up than people realize. And from there, I think it's going to come down to that reach advantage. That's huge, 84 inches, especially for someone who's 6'3". Because when you get in the ring with someone, you kind of try to gauge that distance, and it's really hard to gauge that in your mind when someone you think shouldn't be able to hit you on your punches, or hit you on their punches can. And you see that in a lot of his fights. Guys are kind of on the outside, and they seem to think they're out of his range. And then he kind of hits them at the end of his shots and really stuns them because of his power. And I think we're going to see that happen in this one. Aspinall, is a good fighter, but he does have this tendency to kind of leave his hands low and back out in a straight line after engaging. And we've seen him kind of get clipped a little bit there. I mean, the Curtis Blades fight obviously ended within 15 seconds with that knee injury. But even before that happened, he actually got hit twice by Blades straight to the face. If he gets hit like that by Pavlovich, it's going to be lights out because Pavlovich loves to swarm. So I like Pavlovich to win by knockout here. You can get that at plus 130 over at Bet365.
Okay, yeah, exciting times in the UFC heavyweight division. A lot of young contenders. Okay, let's get into a few more picks. My favorite underdog on the card. Give me the Olympian Mark Madsen plus 164 over Jared Gordon. So I think that this fight is much closer than these odds indicate, and there is a very clear path to victory for Madsen that is taking Gordon to the mat and controlling him. So Madsen should be incredibly desperate in there, and he should not care if he needs to win ugly or win boring. One last push for this guy at 39 years old. He was looking pretty good in his career in the UFC, and he did get burned a little bit in his most recent fight. He fought Grant Dawson, who was a short notice opponent. Dawson came in overweight. He didn't make weight for that fight, so Madsen did end up getting submitted in that fight, but maybe a little bit of an excuse there. And like I said, I do think it's going to be a boring win. Madsen needs to depend on his wrestling in this one. This guy is a silver medalist Olympian, excuse me. And look at Gordon. A little over a year ago, he fought Grant Dawson as well. Dawson took him down 7 times, controlled him for over 7 minutes. So I could see a similar result here. So give me the Olympian, Mark Madsen, plus 164. Row, back to you for 2. What's the first one you like?
Yeah, so I'm on a couple of underdog plays as well. Let's start
Yes.
off with Jessica Andrade taking on Mackenzie Dern. Now, I do understand why the odds are the way they are. I understand why Andrade is the underdog. Dern's at about minus 200. You look at Andrade, and yeah, she's a former strawweight champ and former contender, but she's on a 3-fight losing streak and was finished in all of them. Aaron Blanchfield, Yan Jiaonan, Tatiana Suarez. She was actually submitted in 2 of them. And now she's taking on a submission specialist in Dern. So, yes, I understand why on the surface you might think Dern's going to win this. But if you look at Dern's last 4 fights, it's not as crystal clear as you might think. Yeah, she's coming off a big win against Angela Hill. I don't really rate Hill that highly, to be honest. She's kind of a borderline top 15 fighter. Doesn't really stand out in any one area. And then she's got a couple of losses in those four fights. She lost to Yan Jianyan, lost to Marina Rodriguez, and then she had a split decision win against Tisha Torres, which I thought she should have lost as well. So it very well could have been Dern coming in on a 3-fight losing streak against Hill last time out. So it's not like she's been, stringing together a bunch of impressive wins as well. And you look at Dern, yeah, she's a world class BJJ specialist, but her offensive wrestling hasn't been the best. It's gotten a little bit better in her last 2 fights, but we're still looking at a fighter whose takedown accuracy is just 15%. Now, Andrade is a really physical fighter. She's strong. Her takedown defense is at 70%. And I think for Dern to get her hands on Andrade and implement her grappling, she's going to be taking a lot of damage in those intermediate exchanges. So, give me Andrade to pull off the upset here. Another one, where I like this small underdog in this case is the Vyacheslav Borshev taking on Nazim Sadikov. Now, this is an interesting one. Sadikov opened at like close to minus 200. A lot of money's actually come in on Borshev. Borshev's, getting about like he's sitting at about plus 130, 120 now. So definitely money coming in on him. I still think there's value, especially if you bet on him to win by knockout. Now, this should be a banger. This could very well end up being fight of the night. These guys are lightweights, but they love to throw down. You look at Borshev, doesn't have a huge record in the UFC or in MMA in general, but kickboxing background. 18-2 in his professional kickboxing career, 2-0 as a pro boxer. So obviously a very, very good striker. His weakness, though, is pretty clear. He's awful on the mat. So he's 3-2 in the octagon, all 3 of those wins coming by knockout. And in those 2 defeats, he was taken down 20 times. So this guy's terrible on the mat. And Sadikov is a much better grappler. He is talented as a grappler, but he hasn't really used that part of his game a whole lot in the UFC. He doesn't really rely on that offensive wrestling at all. He really likes to keep things standing up and strike. And I think we're going to see a striking battle here. And I think Borshev will have the advantage. This is a little bit cleaner on some of those exchanges. And I like the fact that you can get him by knockout at plus 260 right now over at Bet365. So I think there's some really good value there. So give me Slava Claus by knockout.
Okay, let's wrap by kicking around some major fight announcements to kick off 2024. So Dana White had a big announcement on social media. 3 title fights to kick off the year. Sean Strickland minus 150 over Dricus Duplessis, who comes back at plus 125. I do think that is the fight to make at middleweight. Some people are talking about Adesanya maybe getting an immediate rematch. Adesanya made it easy for them by saying he was going to take some time off. So that was the fight to make there. We knew this one was coming. Volkanovski minus 188. Topuria coming back at plus 162. Obviously, that's the fight to make at 145. It's kind of good that Volkanovski was rumored to be taking that fight in January, but they did push that back a month after his loss to Islam. So give him a little bit of extra time to prepare. I like that. I do think anything inside of minus 200 is a very fair number for Volkanovski. And then this one, we have Sean O'Malley minus 200 over Merlin Vera, who comes back at plus 164. Merlin Vera is the man who beat him, you probably recall. I don't know. I think that's kind of a fair number on Vera. Now, that said, I don't think Merlin Vera deserves this title shot by any means whatsoever. I would have given it to probably Corey Sandhagen. I mean, Merlin Vera is a guy who got beat 50-45 in that fight versus Sandhagen, if I'm not mistaken. So I don't think he deserves it, but I do understand from a storyline perspective. And the UFC is a business. O'Malley's a marketable guy. So I wouldn't quite say it's a layup for him, but I don't think they want to put him in there with a wrestler right away, a guy who's going to take him down and lay on him for 25 minutes. So, Ro, any thoughts about those 3 fight announcements and the odds attached to those fights?
Yeah, I mean, like you said with the last one, I'm glad they're not, giving him Mirab Dvalishvili right away because Mirab is kind of boring, man. It's just takedown spamming the whole time, and he refused to pretty much fight Sterling, his trading partner there for years. So I think you move him down the pecking order, give it a shot to other people. I understand why it's going to Cheeto. I understand why you like Sandhagen there instead. But Sandhagen, I think, is coming off an injury as well. So I think Cheeto's the fight you make now. You let O'Malley maybe bounce back from that only loss in his career, and then you hopefully you still have Sandhagen to line up next after that. I'm with you on the other fights as well. I think that's good value on Volk to start off. I wonder what this line would have been if Volk just never took that, late notice fight against
Good point.
Makhachev. I think he would have been probably like in the range of -300 or more. So it's really interesting to see that at -188 right now. And yeah, and the other one, I like the Duplessis fight against Strickland. A lot of people seem to be saying that Strickland should easily take care of him. I think people are forgetting that Duplessis, he had a pretty big upset as well and really took it to Whitaker. So, I think it should be a good fight, and I'm interested in seeing what the closing line ends as. But I think we're going to see some early money come in on Strickland there.
Yeah, I don't know. I might like Duplessis there. He's coming off
Same.
of that big knockout. Strickland's a guy who's been quite up and down, I guess you could say, through
Yeah.
his career. He does have some really ugly losses, whereas Duplessis has been mainly up. So plus 125 on him. And I bet you if he wins, Israel Adesanya is going to look to come back a lot sooner. So we will
Yeah.
discuss those fights in more detail when they get here. But that does it for this edition of Pound for Pound Picks. If you like the video, let us know by hitting that like button right down there. Make sure you are subscribed to the Covers YouTube channel. Best of luck with your bets at UFC 295.